Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year's. Welcome back to episode 2 of our Twitter app tutorial series. And in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to use the open source LBTAComponents package that I've written to make our lives a lot easier in terms of building out the rest of the Twitter app. So this video, I'm going to quickly go over the last lesson in building out our simple lists. And then after that, I'm going to teach you guys how to integrate this pod to speed up the development process. All right. So let's go ahead and look at this application that we're rendering out using Home Controller right here. We get this blue top section, which is the header, and a bunch of yellow cells, which are pretty typical, and a green footer at the very bottom. This type of list pretty much renders out, like I would say, 90% of applications out there. It represents this top section of users in the Twitter app. If you click onto here, it also represents what you see as this header up here, and then a bunch of cells down below. So being able to build out this type of layout is very useful, and it's even more useful if you can build it out very, very quickly. And what I mean is, building out this list right now requires us to register a bunch of cells using some cell ID string for the cell ID header and footer. And then after that, we go through the process of dequeuing it and then returning the view, eventually rendering out what we have inside of this simulator. So while doing all this is not all that difficult, it would be very nice if we didn't have to jump through all of these hoops to render out this list, right? So what I do in my production applications is I use a small framework that I've written in the past 2 years or so, and I've slowly improved it to just make it better. So today's video, I'm going to show you guys how to actually build out this entire list right here very easily using my little framework, right? So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to show you how to install this framework here. So I'm going to clear all of this out and ls. So inside of this project right now, if I execute pod init, I get this pod file right here, or right there rather, and I'm going to open a pod file and dragging into the screen here, we have the configuration for the pod that we want to install, which is LBTAComponents, and I'm going to specify a tag release version of 0.19, hit save, quit out, and now hit pod install. So the reason why we use 0.19 is, as of today's recording, which is roughly January 1st of 2017, we're going to use all of the code included in 0.19 of LBTAComponents. If you're watching this in the future, the source code you see today in today's video is probably not going to be absolutely compatible. So watch out for that. Now I'm going to, close out the Xcode project that we have in the back. Exit out, and now we can open up this Twitter Xcode workspace file right here. And this is going to open up another project here. So it starts off with a 7+. I just want to run the code really quickly using the iPhone 7 simulator. So it's going to launch the application. It's going to look exactly the same as it did before, giving us the header, cell, and footer. Opening up the project, you notice that all of the code is still exactly the same, but now we have the inclusion of the pod framework, which is here, here, and here. The framework includes a bunch of useful classes that we'll use later on, but what we want to focus on right now is just data source, cell, and controller. So I'm going to show you guys quickly how to rebuild this entire list that you see on the simulator very, very easily using this small framework. Okay, so to do that, I want to first create a brand new controller inside of my project with new file, with file, and I'm going to call this home. Let's see, DatasourceController. And for this file, I will import LBTAComponents class. Let's get that. Home, DatasourceController. This will be subclassing DatasourceController. SAViewDit load, SuperViewDit load, collection view, background color equals .red. And this is going to give us a controller with a red background collection view. So some of you guys are probably wondering what DatasourceController is. I'm going to command click into this class, giving me the exact code that you guys should be seeing as well. You'll notice that DatasourceController is nothing other than a UICollectionViewController. and basically conforming to this delegate flow layout protocol as well. So nothing too special about this. And now I want to show this home data source controller inside of my simulator. So the way to do that is to go back into app delegate and swap out the home controller for the Windows root view controller right now. So I'm going to do that very easily by commenting out that code and just say window.root view controller equals UI navigation controller root view controller home data source. Let me just build out this project here, data source controller, and I get that. So I'm going to run the code right now. You'll notice that I don't need to provide a UI collection view flow layout for this class. I can just use the empty constructor because by default, data source controller uses a UI collection view flow layout. So that's pretty convenient for us. We're seeing this red background, obviously, because of line 14 right here. So we're pretty much good to go in terms of setting up our project and executing some custom code. All right, so I got rid of the red background color like that. And now, how do I render out this list that we had previously? So first thing I want to show you guys how to do is to just render out a couple of cells inside of my collection view in the simulator. So to do that, what we want to do is provide a custom implementation of something called a data source, okay? So don't worry too much if you don't understand the terminology just yet. It's all going to make sense as I type out all of the classes and its functionalities. Okay, so this class will be called home data source, subclassing a data source like this. And here I will say let words equals an array of user1, user2, and user3. So I have 3 strings inside of a list right now. I'm going to provide an override for a number of items in section like this and return a value of words.count. So I'm going to run this file now. Nothing else is going to change except for the red is going to be removed and we have just a blank controller. So now that I have home data source as a class, I can construct home data source like this equals home data source and construct it like so, and self data source equals home data source right there. Okay, so what this means is I am going to now render out 3 items in my collection view, and this is what you see. So 3 items, pretty much words.count gives me the 3 inside of this list here, and it's rendering out nil. So how do I get it so that it renders out user 1, 2, and 3 per row? It's very easy to do if we just provide another override called item. And item for index path pretty much will return words. Let's see, index path.item. And it's going to give me user 1 for row 0, 2, and 3 for the other rows as well. So running this now, you'll see user 1, user 2, and user 3. So basically, we were able to render out just a very simple list without having to go through registration, dequeuing, and also figuring out which row or which item belongs to which row in the collection view. So all of this is really, really simple. Try not to worry about how all of this is working. Just imagine the entire thing as sort of black magic for now. That's kind of the usefulness of a framework. Saves you a lot of time and a lot of code. So bringing back this guy, I want to now render out yellow cells for each one of my cells inside of the list. And to do that, you have to provide a custom cell for your list. So to provide a custom cell is also very easy if you just create a custom cell. Okay, so I'm going to just create it perhaps up here. Let's just use this entire file. Class of, let's say, user cell, and this will subclass something called a data source cell. So you guys kind of see this pattern. Everything in this package revolves around the idea of a data source, right? And for this cell, I'll say SetUpViews and super SetUpViews background color equals dot yellow. I think that will work. So every data source cell class comes with a method called SetUpViews. You just override it to obviously set up your views. And you see how we don't really see the cell yet. And the reason is because we need to provide the data source with this type of cell for the controller. So to do that, it's very easy as well. So cell class is right here. Expects you to return an array of data source cells types, which will be returning user cell.self like that. And now I can run my application. This is going to render out these yellow cells for each one of the rows inside of my collection view like this. So very good stuff. And now your next question is probably, well, how do I get it to render out the words of not test, but then user 1, 2, and 3 from this bit of architecture that we've set up? So it's very easy. First, I'm going to render out these test labels right here by providing a label inside of user cell. So pretty easy if you just construct it with name label. UI label equals this little block of code. Let's execute this block of code with UI label. Label.text equals test, returning this label outside, executing that block with these two parentheses, giving us this label right here. I'm going to add it as a subview inside of this yellow cell. Name label as that subview, and name label, you can anchor it like this using these cells top anchor, the cells left anchor, and these cells bottom anchor like so, and the cells right anchor. And for all the padding constants, let's just use 0, 0. Width height is also just going to use 0. Okay, so I'm going to run this application now. This anchor method comes from the LBTAComponents package. So I'm going to command click into anchor, and it's going to execute all of this code right here, which you guys might have seen it before, but it simply lays out the view such that you can clamp each side of the subview to the parent's anchor system. So basically it's just stretching out the label to fill the entire yellow cell right there. So that's how this anchor method works. So we have, pulling back our mock here, we have these test labels inside of our rows now. So how do I get it to say user 1, 2, and 3 inside of each one of these rows? So what the data source cell also comes with is the access of each one of these items inside of that method called item for index path. And if you override something called data source item, whenever you set this data source item, you can actually get access to these items here. In other words, if I just say name label.text equals data source item as string, run the application right now. Every time you return one of these items for one of your rows, you automatically get access to it inside of that particular cell. So now you see the app says user 1, 2, and 3. So that's pretty convenient if you don't want to write all of that code that manages the dequeuing process of the cell, setting the item on that cell, and then having it render out. All you need to know is that each cell pretty much automatically knows what it needs to use to render out its entire view. So that's how that works, and getting pretty close. The next thing to do is to render out these headers and footers inside of this view right here. So to do the header is very similar to these actual cells right here. And we're gonna go up here and create this custom blue header. And to do that, we'll say class right here, user header. Let's just get the camel case correct. Data source cell, SetUpViews. Let's see, super.SetUpViews. And then we'll say background color equals dot blue. So pretty straightforward here. And how do we use this user header now? Well, very similar to cell classes inside of data source, we can also provide something called header classes, return, let's see, user header dot self, like so. And now if you try to run this application, you would kind of expect it to render out something as a header, but it actually does not. And the reason is because inside of home data source controller, we have yet to provide, let's get some spacing down here. We need to provide the ref size header for the size of the header inside of your collection view, which will be return CG size of, let's see, width height, view frame width for the entire width of the view, and height, let's just use an arbitrary value of 50. So running this application now, you get a nice header that's rendered out in blue that has 50 height, and it's as wide as the screen is currently at. So that's what that looks like. And you can imagine now how you can also render out this custom footer down here. So a very similar process. If you follow this same pattern here, class, user, header, user, footer, okay, footer, data source cell right here, setup, let's see, views, super setup views, background color equals dot green like so. And then going back to the data source, let's just provide an override for footer classes right here, return user footer and self. And if you run this app now, again, you're not going to see the footer just yet until you provide it with a size inside of the controller. And this is exactly how a UICollectionViewController works already. So let's see, ref footer size, I believe. Let's see, ref size for footer. Let's just copy and paste this code up here, paste it in there, give it a value of twice as tall as the blue header. So we're going to get a footer that has a green background, just like this right here. So pretty easy. And this list right here is actually even smarter than what is being rendered here, because we actually get the model object to render per row. So one thing I want to kind of address with the way that this data source guy works is some of you guys are probably wondering why you return an array of classes instead of just the class. Well, a collection view typically can have more than one section, and every time you need a different type of header, cell, or footer, you can just return it as that slot inside of this array right here. So it makes it very easy, and it's very customizable, flexible to do whatever you need it to do. Okay, so let's see, what do we want to do now? With just like the other kind of projects that I have, I really want to provide a clean, I guess a clean style of organization for my code, starting from the very beginning, because if your code is all cluttered, it's very hard to manage. So what we are going to do is to provide an MVC type of grouping to all of these files in here, or all of these classes rather. And the new group will start off with controller, and let's see, new group, let's see, model, and finally we'll use a group of view. So MVC, very, very common pattern that we see inside of iOS development. The views inside of this style of architecture are all of these cell, header, and footer classes. So let me just cut all that. And inside of view, I'm just going to create a new file, with file, call it cells. And inside of here, I'll say paste. Import LBTAComponents. Hopefully I typed that out correctly. So we get our cells in here. Instead of model, I'm going to use this model object called home data source. And I'm going to say new file, with file, home data source. I know this is probably not the most exciting part of the tutorial, but cleaning up your project so that it makes a lot of sense is one of the most important things to do inside of a good iOS project. So home data source, paste that in there, LBTAComponents. There we go. We get our data source and data source cell types. So the last remaining task is to include something called the actual data source, or the controller. So I'm just going to drag that in there, look at this file right here, get rid of these spaces, and run the application just to make sure everything compiles and runs smoothly. So now that the rendering is complete inside of the simulator right there. All right, so that's going to be it for today. Hopefully you guys didn't find the video too confusing. Remember to leave a thumbs up for the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to properly lay out the subviews in all of our user cells. Remember, the source code for today's video is available down in the description below. Make sure to go download that project, play around with it to make sure you know how all of it works. That's going to be it for me. Keep on coding, and hopefully I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.